Narrative is the foundation of all storytelling with data. The student learning outcomes for this module are to recognize the stages of several narrative models for data stories, to describe the common types of story points, to construct the structure of a data story through storyboarding, and explain additional methods of increasing the effectiveness of your data stories. You found an insight. How you present the insight to the audience has a great influence on what will happen to the insight. Will it be acted on? Will it be laid aside? The power of storytelling with data is the inclusion of a story. You may not realize it, but stories follow one of several models. These are three we will be looking at today. Aristotle was a Greek philosopher who examined the basic structure and rules of drama in his book Poetics. He saw plot as the most important part of Greek tragedy, ahead of characters or other narrative elements. He said stories have a simple structure, a beginning, middle, and end, and that they are connected through a series of cause and effect events. He specifically mentioned a complication and an unraveling and compared it to a knot that is tied and untied. Here you see Freytag's model, which builds on Aristotle's by adding more elements. Exposition is the beginning of the story, where the setting and the characters are introduced. Then there is an inciting incident, a major plot point that transitions to the problem. There's rising action. It's a series of events that build up to the climax. And then the climax is the most intense, important event in the story where the main character wins or loses. In the falling action, the rest of the events that unravel, the denouement is also called the conclusion. All the conflicts are resolved and the details are explained. This model is prevalent model, and most popular books and films follow this one. The third model we're looking at is Campbell. Campbell developed this model after studying myths and fables from around the world. This centers around a character being called on an adventure, overcoming challenges, and returning as a hero. The emphasis is on the central character of the story. This method would not align to data stories, and yet Aristotle's structure is too simple for a data story. So, based on Freytag's model, the data storytelling arc is a framework that works well for data stories. In the setting, you need to give the context, although you should not give an overview of the analysis process. Give them enough context so that when you introduce the hook, the problem, they'll understand it's a problem. Then you begin to present the supporting points in a manner that is directed and focused. In the aha moment, you'll share your main finding or insight. Then you need to be proactive and provide the audience with their next steps so they can affect the change. Let's take a look at some common story points. There's change over time. It looks at how a measure changes over time. This is the most basic. A relationship shows how two things are related to each other. An intersection shows when one number surpasses another. Your West Coast division is bypassing your Midwest division in sales. To project forward, forecasting numbers for the future, growth in store locations. You can compare and contrast similarities, differences between two or more items. You can compare the effectiveness of the newest iPhone over the newest Android. You can drill down, move from the higher level view to more detailed. You can start by looking at all the sales reps in the world, then narrow down just to North America, or zoom out and do the opposite. You can cluster, show a large grouping or concentration of something. You can just look at outliers, a value that is totally different than the others. Understand, though, that all of these types of data points can and do overlap. So be aware that each data point may include more than one of these. So let's take a look at the example e-commerce story that was in the book. The book describes an e-commerce story with these data points. Change over time. The online sales follow a cyclical pattern, increasing the previous year's results, except for the last period where they were less. Then there's a drill down. The 3 orange product categories are underperforming last year's sales. And then there's a cluster. All of the items in the underperforming categories are mapped, and you can see in the low undesirable quadrant, there are products from the same brand. Project forward. If the brand issue can't be resolved, the team is going to miss its quarterly sales by 38%, which means they won't get their bonuses. Compare and contrast. You explain 3 possible solutions, comparing and contrasting them for your audience. In the e-commerce story, setting the stage and the hook is the first one. Then there are 2 rising insight data points, the aha moment, and then a solution and next steps. Now we're going to take those points and organize them into a story through storyboarding. Storyboarding at its simplest looks something like this, although it could be drawn on paper. It's just a lot easier to move points around, insert points, and delete points when they're all on sticky notes. But remember, the primary purpose of storyboarding is to build a story, not determine what visualizations you are going to produce. We begin with the story arc. Place the aha moment first to make sure that you have an aha moment. Make sure that the aha moment passes the so what test. This should be distilled down to one sentence that includes monetary values if they're part of the finding. Now, every slide we put left of the aha moment has to help advance the story to the aha moment. Next is the hook. It's a key observation that catches your audience's attention and makes them want to know more. You are not going to be telling the story of how you did the analysis. This is called the analysis journey. That's not what the story is about. You are telling the story about the important insight and why it's important and how to solve it. Now that you know what your hook is, what context does it need? What does the audience need to know to understand that the information in the hook is not normal? This is what you need to include in the setting. You need to be careful to think about who your audience is going to be and how much they know about the department and the processes within. This will dictate how much setting context you need to include. Now you're going to build your narrative. All points should be considered. If it doesn't fit on the path from hook to the aha moment, if it doesn't advance the narrative, it shouldn't be included. There's no minimum or maximum number of points. Every data story is different. You need to consider which supporting data points develop the plot or provide crucial context. Do you anticipate audience questions for which you can include an explanation up front? What was unusual? What was unexpected? What data points can be removed and the story stays the same? If points are redundant or tangential, eliminate them. Note that it's often here that you find you're missing some analysis or data points, and you need to perform more analysis to close the gap. Go ahead and do that. After the aha moment, you need to provide guidance on how your audience can move forward with the idea or insight. You also need to leave a lot of time for questions that may have arisen. But what happens when you don't know what the solution is? You may not have the expertise or authority to propose solutions. It's best then to share up to the aha moment and leverage the know-how of the group. You've set up the stage for collaboration. You've given the group the information they need, so you need to turn it over to them. Let's take a look at a few ways you can increase a data story's impact. One way is through focusing on 1 or 2 individuals behind the numbers you've collected. In Chapter 3, 2, you heard the story of Rokia and how her story about Thank you. One way is through focusing on one or two individuals behind the numbers that you've collected. In Chapter 2, you heard the story of Rokia and how her story was more compelling than the statistics about suffering in Africa. We learned that Semmelweis may have been more successful if he focused on one or two of the women and humanized the data by introducing the audience to them. If you make the story resonate with the audience, it will have a greater impact. To do that, introduce the audience to individuals if at all possible. So, how do you find the hero? Look specifically at your data. Where does your insight intersect with people? Is it customers who purchase a kind of expensive dog food? Once you've identified the hero, you're going to build a persona of the hero. Personas are used in marketing to represent groups of people. Based on statistics, they give marketers a more personal look at people's wants and needs. So give your persona a name, a photo, give them a voice. If you have data from focus groups or surveys that you can interject here as real quotes, that would be great. If you need to show how hard it is to open the cans of dog food, then make a video of someone trying. Show the journey to your audience. It is through this humanization that you will cause a greater impact. Another way to increase the audience buy-in is to ensure that the conflict generates suspense. The audience is invested in wanting to find out what happens. You can give them more angles of the conflict to increase the suspense. As the audience gets a better understanding of the problem, the conflict, they can feel the growing tension. Another way to increase the impact of your stories is to use analogies. Analogy is a comparison of something complex with something that is simpler. Life is like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get. It's comparing the complexities of human relationships and living to the types of candies in a box where you're unsure of what's inside each. But it's important that the analogy be well suited to the situation by asking these questions. Is it relatable? Is it sound? Is it clear, concise, and interesting? Make sure the analogy simplifies what you're explaining. If it doesn't, don't use it. In this module, we look closely at story structures and frameworks for putting your story together to maximize reader and audience action. In the next module, we'll begin looking at the visualizations and consider their color, layout, format, etc., and how each contributes to the final story.